The chilling static was the first sign, a ragged tear in the silence. Then her voice, thin and fragile, like spun glass on the verge of shattering. Someone's watching me, Wayne. I know this is insane, but you're the only one who ever truly understood him. A sharp click, and the line went dead. 5 years. 5 years of absolute nothingness. No late-night calls, no accidental texts, not even a forwarded meme. Just a vast, echoing void from the woman who, before our families, had pledged forever. Forever, it turned out, meant only a few months before she found solace, and more, in someone else's arms. And now a voicemail from a number I hadn't saved. Yet the mere sight of it sent a cold dread through my gut. Ava Reed. I barely recognized her voice at first, so stripped bare, as if a relentless wind had eroded her spirit. She sounded utterly terrified, terrified of him. But here's what no one tells you about the past. You think it's buried. After the affair, the brutal fallout, everything she'd lost, I'd assumed her new partner had vanished from our lives entirely. Apparently he hadn't. Apparently he was still very much a part of her world. And apparently she believed I, the man she'd shattered, was her last hope. Funny considering she never once offered an apology for what she did. I replayed that message a staggering 17 times before my fingers, almost against my will, dialed her number. When she answered, her voice a hushed murmur, barely above a whisper, two truths hit me with the force of a physical blow. First, she wasn't calling to atone. Second, there was undeniably someone listening on her end. What she confessed next made my meticulously ordered world begin to violently spin. She wasn't seeking reconciliation. She didn't pine for me. Love wasn't the motive. No, she was calling to say that Sullivan Parker, the man she'd chosen over me, had vanished. Utterly, irrevocably disappeared. No farewell note, no trace, no shred of closure. And she believed I was next. Sleep was a foreign concept that night. I sat rigid on the edge of my bed, my gaze fixed on the ceiling fan above, its slow, hypnotic spin offering no answers. Her words looped, a haunting, inescapable melody. He's gone, and you might be next. It defied all reason. How could I be next for something I never asked to be a part of? A drama I'd been so brutally excised from? Ava offered precious little on the phone, just fragmented thoughts, pure terror in her voice, and a few deeply unsettling facts. Sullivan, the man who'd torn our lives apart, had been gone for 3 days. His upscale loft apartment was untouched, his phone still charging on the nightstand, keys dangling innocently by the door. No signs of struggle, no frantic message, no packed travel bags. He was simply gone. And the night before, she swore she'd seen someone watching her from the shadowy depths of the parking garage beneath her building. A figure, tall and unnaturally still, lurking behind a concrete pillar. One blink, and he'd vanished, ready to learn the shocking truth about what she saw. Every fiber of my being screamed to be cold, to sever the call and leave her to whatever tempest she'd invited into her life. But I couldn't. Something in her voice, a raw, desperate honesty I hadn't heard in years, resonated. This wasn't the same woman who'd calmly declared she no longer believed in monogamy. This was someone profoundly, irrevocably terrified. Against every shred of logic, I agreed to meet her. A public spot, broad daylight, neutral ground. We chose a dimly lit bar we once actively avoided because she claimed the bartender had a creepy vibe. Now it felt like the safest haven on earth. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The fiery, impulsive woman who once dyed her hair crimson because she felt like a volcano ready to erupt was gone. In her place was a pale, gaunt figure, her movements twitchy, like a bird perpetually poised for flight. She clutched her arms around herself, far more than she touched the untouched glass of water in front of her. I found myself speechless, allowing her to break the strained silence. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the bar. "That's the name Sullivan kept repeating before he vanished. Do you remember him?" My chest constricted, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Of course, I remembered Elias. He wasn't real. He was our inside joke, a phantom we'd conjured during our marriage to playfully spook each other, a fake stalker we blamed for misplaced remote controls and flickering lights. He was never meant to exist, yet now she claimed Sullivan had feared him. And now Sullivan was gone. A jolt of ice ran down my spine the moment she uttered his name, Elias Jones, a name we'd invented during our second year together, when we were still playful, still innocently naive. He was a running gag, our imaginary menace. Whenever the television remote disappeared into the couch cushions or a pipe groaned in the dead of night, we'd laugh, blaming Elias. "Must be him again," she'd smirk, playfully tucking her cold feet under my blanket. It was silly, harmless, stupid, until now. "Elias doesn't exist," I managed, my voice strained, unsure if I was trying to convince her or desperately clinging to my own sanity. Her eyes, wide and glassy, snapped to mine. "I thought that too," she whispered, "until Sullivan started seeing him." I leaned back, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She explained that over the past year, Sullivan had become consumed by the idea that someone was following them. Not a vague paranoid delusion either. He was specific. He named the man Elias, described him wearing dark, heavy clothing, a long, somber coat, always standing perfectly still, like a forgotten statue. Sullivan's journals, filled with meticulously documented sightings, crude drawings, dates, and times, confirmed his growing obsession. It escalated until he refused to leave the loft, taping the peephole shut, sleeping with every light blazing. Ava had dismissed it as a mental breakdown. Perhaps it was, but then she saw him too. "Last week," she said, her hands trembling so violently she had to brace them on the table. "I was at the community laundromat, and when I looked up from my phone, he was just there, by the industrial dryers, just standing. The same dark coat, the same unsettling stillness Sullivan drew. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. I blinked, and he was gone." My gut churned. I wanted to storm out, to tell her she was projecting, grieving, lost in delusion. But the part that truly chilled me, the part I couldn't rationalize away, was this. I had seen that exact same figure a few nights prior. Taking out the trash behind my apartment building, I noticed someone across the street, motionless, too still for comfort. I'd shrugged it off as a discarded mannequin or a particularly strange late-night Uber wait. But what if it wasn't? What if her mind wasn't playing tricks? I tried to convince myself that none of this had anything to do with me. I hadn't cheated. I hadn't conjured ghost stories or breathed life into imaginary stalkers. My chapter with her was closed. Yet as I left that dimly lit bar, a sudden, inexplicable urge compelled me to check my phone's camera roll. And there, tucked away in a photo I had no recollection of taking, was a blurry man in the background, visible through my kitchen window, standing perfectly still, draped in a long, dark coat. This changed my life in 30 seconds. I stared at the photograph for over an hour, zooming in and out like the act itself might erase the chilling fear gripping my gut. I genuinely didn't remember capturing the image. It was time-stamped for 2 nights ago, 7:18 p.m., around the time I was mindlessly microwaving soup and enduring reruns of a sitcom I didn't even like. But there it was, a half-lit reflection in the window above my sink, standing across the narrow alley, blurred slightly as if the figure had moved just as the shutter snapped. The outline, however, was disturbingly clear. The coat was long, the posture stiff, and the face? Well, there wasn't one. Just a pale, featureless blur, like static, not a smudge, not a shadow, but something that looked unnervingly not human. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. A stubborn part of me refused to vocalize it. It felt like an acknowledgement would grant it a terrifying reality. Instead, I sought distraction in trivial, unnecessary tasks. I scrubbed the grout in my shower until my fingers ached. I alphabetized my minuscule spice rack, despite only ever using 3 spices. I even rewatched my old wedding video, a digital relic I should have deleted years ago. In it, Ava was radiant, spinning barefoot on a sun-drenched dock, laughing so hard the camera shook. And I looked like a man who genuinely believed she would never, could never hurt me. The next morning, I woke to a jolt of pure dread. My apartment door was unlocked. I live alone. I am obsessively meticulous, triple checking that lock every single night. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing missing, just unlocked. It was worse than a break-in. It felt deliberately placed, a silent message that I was not alone. I called Ava. No answer. I texted. We need to talk. Something serious happened. No reply. I waited. Nothing. By late afternoon, driven by an urgent premonition, I drove to her apartment building. Her car was in the lot. Her lights were off. Her door was locked. But as I stood outside her unit, about to knock, I noticed something profoundly unsettling. Her second-story apartment window was slightly ajar, the curtain billowing gently outward, and a distinct dark shape stood just behind it. I waved, assuming it was her. It didn't wave back. It didn't move at all. I blinked. The curtain fluttered again. The shape was gone. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. But when I knocked, silence was the only answer. After a few moments of increasingly frantic hesitation, I called the police. Not to be dramatic, I told myself, just a welfare check. But when they arrived and the officer used his key to open the door, the apartment was utterly, profoundly empty. Not just of Ava, but of everything. Furniture, clothes, dishes, even light bulbs, all gone, as if no one had lived there for decades. I stood in the doorway, stunned, watching the two officers navigate the completely bare space. No sofa, no coffee table, no chipped bookshelf, just nail holes where memories used to hang. I desperately tried to explain that I had spoken to the tenant just yesterday, but they looked at me with an unnerving skepticism, as if I'd confused the address. One officer even asked if I was certain I hadn't misremembered the unit number. I wanted to scream. I fumbled for my phone, trying to show them the photo of the apartment from earlier that week. Her couch, her coffee table, her distinct bookshelf. But when I opened the gallery, it was gone. Just gone. The image with the figure in my own window was still there, a chilling testament, but the picture of her living room vanished from the folder. I knew with absolute certainty I hadn't deleted it. The officers, finding no evidence of a crime, filed a basic report, shrugged, and left. I remained at the threshold long after they were gone, staring into the echoing emptiness where her entire world once existed. I should have walked away. I should have driven home and barricaded myself inside with a flashlight and a baseball bat. But something about that desolate space pulled me in, an invisible thread tugging at my very core. There was one thing left in the apartment, a single, pristine envelope resting squarely in the middle of the floor, as if placed there with deliberate intent. My name was scrawled on the front in a jagged, etched handwriting that looked more carved than inked. I picked it up with extreme care, my fingers trembling. Inside was an old photograph, one from a camping trip we'd taken to Arizona years ago. We'd asked a friendly couple to capture a moment of us at the edge of a breathtaking canyon. I remembered the photo vividly, us smiling broadly, arms wrapped around each other, her hair windswept. But this copy was different. In the background, perched on the distant ridge above us, was a figure in a long coat. The same unnerving posture, the same silent, unmoving presence. He was standing behind us. Back then, before the divorce, before Sullivan, before everything, a sudden, bone-deep chill permeated my entire being. I flipped the photo over. 4 words were meticulously carved into the paper with something sharp. You always saw him. That night, sleep was an impossibility, and for the first time, I wasn't entirely certain I was still alone. I locked every door and window in my apartment, a futile gesture I knew. How do you lock out something you once believed was imaginary? I turned on every single light in my apartment and sat squarely in the middle of my living room, the cryptic photograph on the coffee table before me. I stared at it, half expecting it to blink, or for the figure in the background to finally move if I watched long enough. I knew what my therapist, if I still saw her, would say. Trauma plays tricks on memory. Fear alters perception. But this wasn't just a trick of the mind. The unsettling handwriting on the envelope wasn't mine. The photograph had no digital counterpart, no metadata, nothing to anchor it to a verifiable past. And someone had placed it in an empty apartment I wasn't even supposed to be in. The message on the back, "You always saw him," echoed through my skull, a mantra I never meant to learn. At precisely 3:17 a.m., my doorbell rang. I froze, every muscle rigid. It rang again. No preceding knock, no retreating footsteps, just a single sharp chime. I crept to the peephole. No one was there. But as I peered through the warped glass, a memory, sharp and brutal, hit me like a physical blow. Years ago, before the divorce, Ava and I had one of our worst arguments. I couldn't recall the trigger, but I remembered her screaming, "He's real, Wayne. I've seen him." And then she'd slammed the door so hard a picture frame shattered. I'd laughed at her then. I'd thought she was just trying to guilt trip me. I'd told her she was paranoid. Maybe she was. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd been telling the absolute truth. The doorbell never rang a third time. I waited until the first sliver of sunrise before I dared open the door. Nothing. Not even a stray flyer, but someone had drawn something in chalk on my doorstep. A perfect, spiraling circle made of intricate, interlocking lines, like a maze with no discernible center. I took a photo of it, backed away slowly, and didn't step outside. I couldn't. Later that day, feeling a desperate, irrational pull, I drove to our old apartment building, wondering if Ava had perhaps instinctively returned there. The building stood, unchanged, but her name was no longer listed on the buzzer. I asked the property manager if anyone had seen her recently. He looked utterly confused, stating that no one by that name had ever resided there. But I knew she had. I had helped her paint those walls. We'd marked our heights in the closet, year after year. We were married in that very living room. Now it was as if she had never existed. And perhaps, just perhaps, neither had I. That night, I dreamt of the canyon again, the very same one from the photograph. But this time, we weren't alone. I was standing at the precipice while she sat cross-legged beside a crackling fire, humming a tune I couldn't place. I turned slowly, feeling the phantom heat of the flames, and saw a tall figure lurking in the deep shadows, perfectly still, as if carved from ancient stone. I couldn't make out his face, but I felt the crushing weight of his silent gaze. Ava looked up at me, her eyes glassy and vacant, and whispered, "You brought him here." I woke, gasping for air, drenched in a cold sweat, the bed sheets tangled around me like a straitjacket. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I hesitated, my hand trembling, before picking it up. Another voicemail, this one from an unknown number. I almost deleted it outright, but a morbid curiosity, or something far darker, compelled me to listen. There was no voice, only the familiar, insidious static. But hidden beneath the hiss, barely audible, I heard what sounded unmistakably like a clock ticking, and then my name, repeated over and over in a child's chilling whisper. "Wayne! Wayne! Wayne!" I flung the phone across the room, the impact jarring through the silence. By now, all attempts at logical explanation had ceased. I knew with absolute certainty that something fundamental was unraveling, and I was inextricably at its core. But why me? Why now? I never invited this. I didn't create Elias Jones to summon something malevolent. He was a joke, a harmless ghost story. Yet everything, every terrifying piece pointed back to him, as if the sheer idea of him had given him form. I returned to the apartment building where Ava had vanished. I don't know what I expected to find, but I needed to see it again, to make sense of the void. The building was still there, but the unit number she'd given me now belonged to someone else entirely. An elderly woman who'd lived there for 20 years. She'd never heard of Ava Reed, nor had she heard of me. When I inquired about the empty apartment, she looked at me with something close to pity and said, "Sweetheart, we haven't had a vacant unit in this building for almost a decade." I walked out, shaking uncontrollably, my pulse hammering. I stumbled back to my car, fighting for breath, desperate to think clearly. On the windshield, tucked beneath the wiper blade, was another envelope. No postage, no return address, just a single word scrawled in that same etched, scratchy handwriting. Remember. Inside was a printed list, names, dates, all unfamiliar until the final entry. Sullivan P. found September 12th. No trace. The list ended there, but beneath it, barely visible in faint red ink, was a final, horrifying line. Next, Wayne M., September 14th. That was tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. I sat by the window, watching the solitary streetlight flicker in the pervasive darkness, waiting for something, anything from one to stir. My heart felt like a clock spring winding ever tighter, second by agonizing second, counting down to some invisible deadline. September 14th, the paper had declared, and as the sun began its hesitant climb, painting the sky a pale, uneasy blue, I realized I had a choice. I could wait to disappear, to become another forgotten name on a list, or I could confront whatever this malevolent force was. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove back to the canyon, the very same spot from that haunting photograph, the place where the memory started, or perhaps where it irrevocably fractured. It was a 6-hour drive, mostly through desolate desert, but I didn't turn on the radio. I craved silence, needed to hear my own thoughts, or whatever fragmented pieces were left of them. I reached the overlook just before dusk. The wind was colder, more biting than I remembered. I walked to the edge, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, expecting, I didn't even know what, a shadow, a chilling whisper, a sudden, irreversible fall. But instead I found something entirely unexpected. Peace. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel afraid. It was as if he, Elias, was gone, or perhaps finally satisfied. And then, on a jagged rock near the precipice, I saw a small bundle, carefully wrapped in a coarse cloth. I hesitated, then slowly unwrapped it. Inside were all the missing pieces. The photograph Ava had left, the chilling list of names, even my phone, completely intact. But more shocking was the note on top, written in clean, familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in years. You remembered. That's all he wanted. You can let go now. No signature, no further explanation, just closure. When I returned home, the chalk symbol on my doorstep had faded into the concrete. My apartment door was locked. The photo of the man in the window was gone from my phone. I checked again and again. Nothing. It was as if the last 5 years had been a fever dream, a nightmarish hallucination. But I knew it wasn't. I felt lighter, as if an immense crushing weight had finally lifted from my chest. I never heard from Ava Reed again. Perhaps she found peace too, or perhaps she became part of the silence I was fortunate enough to escape. Either way, I'm free now, or at least I truly believe I am.